Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I'm glad you're joining us. I'm going to let things settle for a second here and hopefully be able to make. I got to find that echo and get rid of it. Give me a second. It's probably still there. I'm sorry, guys. It's amateur hour here at AT Makers.
It seemed like it was gone there, Bill.
Oh, maybe it's not me. I'm sorry, guys. No, it's me. There you go. I got it. I found it. I had the YouTube window up and it was playing in the background. It's all me because, we want to make this as fun as possible. So let's start this again. I'll cut that part off when we share the video. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this live stream. Tonight we're going to talk about something really important with some good friends of ours, and it's really kind of important for everybody in the maker field who is making devices. And I have some guests I'm going to introduce you to, but we are going to talk about risk assessments. We're going to talk about why we care about risk assessments, why we should be doing nothing without evaluating the risk of the products or projects that we're working on. And oops, there you go. And that was our panel. We're going to drop back to the Brady Bunch in a second. And hopefully we'll get some actual conversations about what can we do, what can't we do, how do we deal with it when the risk of a project is too high? How do we communicate that back to the requester? Is there anything we can do in that the last ditch where we can't do this because it's too high a risk? What do we do? So we're going to have those conversations tonight. I put in place a procedure for risk assessment based on things that I've learned over the past few months. I don't know that it's good. I have an official banner that I'm going to put on and leave on for the next minute that says, nothing you're going to hear tonight is legal advice. I am not an attorney. I will probably never be an attorney, and nobody else. I'm just checking. If David Beckauer joins, he did go to law school, but I don't think he passed the bar. But unless he joins, nobody else is an attorney either. So none of this is legal advice. What it is business advice in some cases, and common sense that we tend to forget about. That's really what I want to get through with today. So while that disclaimer is still running, let me share everybody here and do quick introductions for everybody that's joining. And I hope everybody sees people in the same order. Jake MacGyver and Malad Ha are both from Makers Making Change in Canada. I think it's MacGyver. It should be MacGyver if it's not. It's spelled different. But he's the same guy. He's still MacGyver. Mary Elizabeth is, and I can't see who joined you, Mary. You can unmute and say, is that your dad?
Yeah, this is my dad, Joe McCulloch.
Okay, great. Mary Elizabeth and Joe are there. Mary Elizabeth founded Project Vive, and you
with my dad.
With your dad, Joe. Sorry, Joe, I haven't met you yet. I've met your daughter repeatedly. Which was a great project to bring low-cost AAC to developing countries and then just rural America. We are working quite a bit more with Mary Elizabeth now that she has a short gap of more time before she goes to med school, right? Med school, yes? Med school, all right. Yep. Judy Schoonover is an OT extraordinaire from Michigan, originally from, I don't know where you started off, California, I think, but spent a lot of time in Virginia, and that's where I met you, and now you're in Michigan. But it's also the OT that went and helped me when I needed help with Ella Hunt a couple months ago. Next, there's Chris Young, one of our makers, one of our best makers, and also a recipient of a lot of the devices that we make. So it makes him twice as important to be in this conversation. To his right is Jonathan Lasco, who doesn't really look like that little dot there, but also a maker, works in Maryland. Max's dad, Max Lasco's dad. So he is also both a recipient and maker himself. And finally is Eric Carson, the bottom right, who, among other things, is the COO. I Just gave you a promotion. COO of Lesson Picks, and that means that he works with me a lot, and he is now also the COO of AT Makers, which means he makes sure that I do all the things that I'm supposed to do, rather than goof off and slack off and make cool toys, right? Eric also has a background in project management and is PMM certified, and that's kind of part of why he's here. Is some of this is going to be about keeping track of stuff and documenting and making sure that things get I's get dotted and T's gets crossed, and that's what you're here for, right, Eric?
That'd be me.
That'd be you. That's you. All right. So why are we talking about risk assessments? And why is it the thing that caused me to go to law school last year and gives me still quite a bit of angst, right? It is a real concern that when we make devices, whatever they are, whether it's a joystick or a switch or an infrared, every one of the devices that I have out here, all of them can cause harm. And that's either if they're misused or if they fail, they can cause injury. I am primarily concerned about physical injury. We can talk, and we will talk a little bit about, I'm going to turn off that disclaimer. It's just driving me nuts. We can talk about injury to, just costs, right? Just breaking items, physical injury to people's property. But I'm much more concerned about injury to people's health. And it is something that I think we are a little bit too cavalier about in the maker community, and we need to start thinking about. I, again, am not a professional risk manager, and I am not a lawyer. I did have a great opportunity to have conversations this fall with people who are lawyers and risk managers and judges and all kinds of wonderful people at Stetson Law to try and learn as much as I can about this this area. I'd like to share some of it with you. So with that in mind, I'd like to start with just an overview. And I need to be watching comments. I'm not. So can I ask somebody on here, probably not Eric, maybe Judy or Chris, if you could watch the group. So the only thing I can't see comments from is the group post. So if you could bring up the group post, and if there are any comments there, let me know so that I can address them. Otherwise, if somebody posts on YouTube or on the AT Makers, the actual posting of this, I'll be able to respond. So why do we care about this? It's part of it is we want to do the right ethical thing. We don't want to put products out there that might hurt people. And that should be enough for us to do this, but it's probably not enough motivator because we don't want to not help people because of fear of lawsuits or things like that. What we want to do is we want to meet both of those needs. We want to be careful enough that we're not going to injure anybody. We're not going to put ourselves at risk, whether financially or organizationally. But we also want to be able to do things that sometimes have some inherent risk. So what I did was I took what I had learned with my discussions. I went to a group out of Ireland that has training for risk management. I took some of their best practices and I tried to make something helpful. So let me see if I can share this. All right, that's probably, it's that or that. It's going to be this. There you go. Maybe, nope. It's going to be that. So I put together a project or product risk assessment tool, and I will post the link to this. It's in Google Sheets right now. I've shared the link with this for the folks who are actually joining us here on the conversation. But when I think we will change this over this discussion, and I want to share the one that has our latest input on it. But I think we will update this because we're going to find that some of it is just wrong. But I do want to show you what I think you should look at when you're doing this procedure and how you should go through it. So if you guys don't mind, By the way, I haven't let anybody speak other than me yet. So you guys okay with this? Yes, you're all good with this? Or do anybody want me to, anything you want me to cover that I haven't mentioned? Or anything like that? You're good?
We're good.
We're good. Okay. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. Just unmute your mic and tell me that I'm being an idiot. Okay. All right. So this template is what I think we should capture about any product, any significant product that we're going to be shipping a some number of these to people. And it basically has on the first page a summary that says, all right, what's the product? Describe it, give me an image. When do we do the assessment? Where are people going to find it? Whenever you do one of these assessments, I'd make a video of it, and it's got to have more than just you on it. It's got to have multiple stakeholders involved talking about how this works. So capture that, have a list of who the attendees were for the assessment. When you're all done, you're going to put on here the summary. But what you're going to come out with is a list of initial risks that you find that you need to address. And then after you've mitigated it, you're going to come up with a different list that says, okay, after we do these mitigations, and we'll talk about those, whether they're warnings or re-engineering or limiting distribution or whatever it is, this is what the risk looks like when you're done. And if you've got anything that is very likely to be a major injury, it really kind of means you got to not do it, right? I mean, that's what it means. It means you can't go forward without doing better than that. If you're going to put something out there that has a high risk of major injury, you need to stop. Okay. If you have something, on the other hand, that is in these yellows, you need to be thinking about these risks, and you need to be sure that the person that you're delivering it to is thinking about them as well. So I put together this procedure, and then I went through it as a dry run on one of our products to make sure that it kind of worked, and it didn't. And so then I completely revamped it and I did it again. So I have that, and I'd like to talk through it with you. And what I'd like to do then is to go through one of our products, to do it as a group, just like we would kind of in real life here. We can talk about which one to take. I've got a whole bunch of them here we can talk about. Or what Milad would probably really like me to do instead, Milad would probably like me to do one of his. Is that right, Milad? Do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
I went mine.
Yeah. So what actually triggered this conversation happening now is that Milad has products that he would like to get out to the public, and he'd like to sell them. And that to me requires this. So let's talk through briefly. Let's go through what we would do. So Judy keeps joining and leaving, and so every time I do that, it switches to this view. So forgive me. I'm not trying to do it. You're all good, Judy. So is there any problem that we could fix on our side on that? No. Okay, she's good. Okay, so the procedure I have on here, and I'm going to see if I can make this easier to read for you. Sorry about this. All right. Basically says, complete the summary information to the left. Ensure that it's going to be recorded. Go through all of the risks that you can come up with for this device. And that's what this tab right here that says risk list is about. We're going to go through this. Once you've done that, for everything on there, make an initial estimate of how likely and how severe it's going to be. If the initial risk level is 4 or higher, and we'll talk what that means, complete the detail list, which looks like this. And it talks through exactly what that risk really means, how likely is it, how can we mitigate it, etc. And then when you're all done, go back and update the list to make sure that everything that might hurt people has been addressed, at least on paper. The reason for documenting it this way is twofold. The first is, and this really is probably something really important to say, the reason for doing this isn't just to do documentation. If somebody has a problem, first, your organization will know that you've done everything you can to try and minimize the injury. if somebody does file a lawsuit and you can say, look, before we gave this product, I'm saying gave intentionally, not sold. Before we gave this product or donated this product to this person, we went through a risk assessment, and here's what we found. Yes, the thing that happened to them is on this list. Here are the things that we tried to do to mitigate it. And even if we didn't get it right, even if your risk assessment isn't accurate, the fact that you went through the effort means you were doing something reasonable. You were doing something that is not, it isn't completely out of the realm of reasonability. And you have a good argument that, you know what, we were doing our best, and what our best was met the standard that of what other people in this space are doing. And if you're not selling an item, that's a really good defense. So if you're not selling an item, you're going to be held to the standard of negligence. And this is where I got to put that stupid thing on again. Sorry. So if you're not selling an item, you're going to be held to the standard of negligence, which means your actions were reasonable. You did things that that a reasonable person in your position would do the same thing, and you are held to that standard. If you're selling your product, it is a different standard. It's strict liability. And really, you need to get liability insurance before you're going to be selling that product. This risk assessment will simply make it possible for you to get that product's liability coverage. So that's really what the kind of the point here is. I would not recommend, and this is this, see that little thing on the bottom there, right? Let's just say this. I am not going to be selling products as AT makers, or as anybody else for that reason, for that matter, without liability insurance on it. Can I get the group here to chime in here? Jake, you have any thoughts on this?
I guess I just want to emphasize one thing is like the liability is certainly a part of it, but certainly for those of us or that coming from an engineering point of view, that's number one in the code of ethics is holding safety and the public welfare at utmost. And so ultimately, this is also a tool for creating better devices and better things. So yes, it's covering your butt in case something goes wrong, but it's also should also come from the lens of, how do we reduce the chance of someone getting injured and sort of maximize the chance of it working effectively for someone.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I will tell you that one of the big takeaways I had from my conversations with every single person on this is, if your actions can be shown to be trying to protect the person who uses your device, and that comes down to everything from the paperwork, like waivers don't help because it looks like you're trying to protect yourself from a lawsuit, but warnings help because you're trying to keep the person from being injured, right? That really is the key to this, is to keep that in mind, that the real purpose of this has to remain reducing injury. That said, there are lots of plaintiffs lawyers out there, and when I went to this class, every kid in the class was a future plaintiff's lawyer, right? They were all going to be plaintiff's lawyers when they grew up. They were all going to be suing. And there's guaranteed somebody who will take any injury that occurs and will come back and say, is there a claim here? Right? So you're right, Jake. But the good news is that defending yourself from a lawsuit, the best defense you have is also to have been putting the safety of your users first. Sound right? Yes, Judy. You don't have to raise your hand.
You may have said this already, Bill, when I was blinking in and out, but this outline that you did, this is a collaborative document, right? It's not just the maker that walks in and says, okay, here are the risks and this should be a collaboration between everyone that can participate, whether it's the parents, whether it's the client themselves or the caregiver, so that everyone is coming up with the risks. And then did you say anything about some sort of consent or signature afterwards that they're aware of this document and how it's been put together? And
there's two different things here. So if you're talking about a one-on-one project, right, then that makes sense. So somebody asks you to do something that has an inherent risk, and you're going through this risk assessment, and at the end of it, you want some acknowledgement by them that they are aware of it. To be honest, my bigger concern are the risks involved with things that we distribute in mass, right? So yes, if you were doing this risk assessment for a project, for a person, then you'd want all those stakeholders in this room because you're doing a one-off project. And sometimes it can be less formal, okay, than what I'm talking about. The formality comes in when you are coming up with a product, whether you're charging for it or not. It is, it's a freedom wing. And I'm going to ship these to anybody who asks for them, right? What are the risks? Or it's a joystick. Well, people, there are safe ways to use a joystick and there are ways that have inherent risks. And I don't get to negotiate with them how they use it, but I do get to inform them of the risks of some of the uses for it, right?
So in this risk information, then, if you're talking about more of a group distribution, then wouldn't you be crowdsourcing that document?
Yes. Yeah, so
before?
that's yes.
Okay.
So there's a difference. The difference really comes down to whether there's a signature or not, right? So if absolutely the people who are on this call is a really good view of who should be on a risk assessment, right? So you've got developers, you've got the people who are shipping the product, you've got the people who might want to sell it, you've got the clinicians who are going to be using it, you've got the end users, and you've got people willing to document everything involved. That is the right people to be doing a risk assessment. Everybody agree with that? Judy, do you agree with that?
Yes, I just want a clarification.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at this, right, one of the first things on here is who attended the assessment. So who is here? Who was involved in getting this information out? And, what were they? What was their role in there? Okay.
Being devil's advocate, does our participation in the risk assessment open us to personal liability beyond the people that actually made and distributed the device?
So that's a good question. I'm going to put that stupid banner up again. How many times do you make me put this banner up here, Chris? So I don't know the answer to that question.
If I participated in one of these discussions and said, okay, here's what I think the risks are, and then somebody else comes along and says, oh, you forgot this whole other case that you didn't even consider, and now you're the one that signed off on this.
Yeah. So
well, see, that's why I was wondering whether this is crowdsourced even prior to having the discussion and the distribution, is that there's a group of people that kind of crowdsource all the scenarios of what could go right and what could go wrong.
So the example that we spent the most time on when we were talking through this, and I don't think I'm going to be in trouble for telling you stories because we'll just take this for what it's worth. The example that we were walking through was things like, okay, you're going to take a bunch of kids to Europe, and you're going to have all kinds of things that are going to happen to these kids when they go to Europe. So that you're a high school and you're going to a European trip, or college, you're going to a European trip. And who has to be involved in figuring out what the risks are? Well, you got to bring in people who've actually been there. You've got to bring in students, right? You got to bring in, what you don't want is you don't want people who have never been. You don't want just the people who are in charge. You want to have people with actual experience. I would think that the more people that you bring in, the better your argument is going to be. I think that there's the likelihood that a participant for information gathering would ever be at risk unless they were also selling the product would be zero. I can't imagine that being the case. I cannot imagine that being the case, given what I know. The more people that you're going to bring in, the better. And certainly having one person go through a risk assessment is better than having zero, right? I think if you wanted to take the extreme, maybe don't have multimillionaires on your risk assessments, because it might attract that issue. But I don't see any other reason to be concerned there. I think the more the broader the audience you have on this panel, the better your risk assessment is going to be done and the more it's going to help you. You also have to remember, one of the things I will share is that Professor K, who I'll probably share this video with, and hopefully he will tell me I was not completely wrong. He said every time he did one of these risk assessments, somebody would say, well, we can't put that on there, right? We can't put that on that. That risk, we can't write that one down. If you write that down, you can't do that, right? Because it's so glaring that it's going to mean we can't do the project. And his argument was that's the thing you have to write down, right? Those are the things you have to write down. You have to write down the things that nobody says out loud. Like, if this switch sticks on a power chair, somebody could drive off a cliff. You have to say that, right? And if you don't say that and you don't document it, that's the risk. The risk is that, you know, the obvious things were omitted in order to make some stupid document. No, you have to actually document the actual risks of the item. Does that make sense? Yes, Chris,
Yes.
Are you comfortable participating in this?
Yes, I am.
Good. Is everybody comfortable? You can all drop off if you want to, except for Eric.
No.
Drop off.
I mean, it does pose an interesting question, though, in terms of there's also an expectation if you go through this process, then that leads to some expectation that there has been some due diligence done. Where if there's nothing, then it'd be interesting to see like a proper
Jake,
lawyer.
there is no way that you're going to be in a better state having done no due diligence than having done bad due diligence. Actually, that's not true. Let me restate that. If you come up with a risk assessment and you identify risks and you say you have to mitigate them, and then you don't do the mitigation, that is worse because you knew you had to do that, right? You knew you had to put the warning on it. You knew you had to change the design and you didn't do it. And that is worse than not having done it. But I think that would be the only case where that would be true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I still think there's some questions there in terms of that professional liability, especially if you are, if you're a professional engineer and you're participating in this, that you're going to be held to a higher standard than an average maker. So that's
interesting. So I think everybody is held to the standard of a maker here, unless you are saying you're doing so. That's an interesting question. I'd like to come back to it. Mary Elizabeth,
just as a comment there, and then we can move on. Yeah,
Mary Elizabeth, did you guys go through this with Project Vive?
Yeah.
Do you have any comments?
To some extent. I mean, we worked with a law clinic for small businesses to rate all of our liability forms that we used. And we basically went through all of our devices, how they were used, with what users and what capacity. And also, I don't know, this is live stream. It's kind of odd. But
yeah. You're welcome to say you don't want to say. That's fine.
Yeah. So we got some advice from other companies in the assistive technology space that were very willing to share, their liability documents, and that we could base what we were doing and working with lawyers to adopt that for us. With that being said, we worked with a liability insurance company to go over the same documents and how they were being used before we ever gave a device or had anybody use it. Okay. And that went from, something like you said, like property damage, all the way to death.
Right. So, did you do that for the things you weren't selling, or was that the threshold?
Everything.
Okay.
Giving away, not selling, donating. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, with the understanding that A, this might not be the best approach, the best procedure, and B, it may not be adequate to protect anybody on anything, and we should be doing it anyways. Why don't we actually go through a risk assessment here? What I thought I would do is I thought I would be the guinea pig first because I have a super safe item that I can talk about, and go through this just from a kind of a procedural standpoint. And then if we have the time, if we have the desire, let's go through an actual one where it's not all coming out of Bill's head, and walk through a risk assessment. I have very dangerous things, and I have very, very not dangerous things, and we can choose one and go through it. Okay, you guys good with that?
I have one comment here.
Yeah. Well, hold on.
So in terms of the risk assessment, if you're doing a full solution, or if you're doing a module, would it significantly be different?
Yeah.
Like,
So there are slight differences. So the question here is, you're making modules that then have to be assembled into a final solution. Is it different? It is different, but it doesn't mean, it means that your risk assessment is of your module, and of what happens if your module fails to meet the things that the function that you claim it will do. It certainly is the case that a final solution that is the rest of the solution can fail, and then obviously it's not your fault. And it's certainly also the case that somebody who's assembling a solution from your modules is going to have a much deeper involvement than somebody who's just buying something and using it, right? And you can make that assumption. But there is a very clear case, Mcpherson V Buick, okay? That was a really old case that talked about a wheel that failed on an old car, and Buick didn't make the wheel, right? The person who made the wheel was the wheel, but I made the wheel. Everybody ended up along that chain. Everybody who had their part was still liable for their part, and then the assembler was also responsible for the whole. So you still have to do this, even though your part may be used in a final solution. Your part needs to be tested, and the risks of your part need to be there. And there's another part here that we're going to talk about called misuse, right? And you can define what proper use is, what intended use is. Then anything else they do is misuse, but we generally don't. We don't define what an appropriate use for our product is. And if you don't do that, then it's kind of assumed that whatever they choose to do with it is the intent. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's, anything else before we go on? All right. Everybody agrees this is worth doing. Yes, I think it is. I think we should be doing a lot more of this. Nope. All right. The tool, let's start with this. So the thing that I did, because it's super easy to evaluate, is, by the way, there's a gnat over here that is driving me absolutely out of my mind. So if you see me going insane, that's all it is. This device right here is one that we make that is a USB filter. It takes in a USB-C. It spits out a USB-C or USB micro B, doesn't matter. And what it does is it converts the IntelliKeys keyboard into a standard keyboard. And this should be like a really safe device. This device just simply should not have any big risks. If you can hurt somebody with this, you're trying pretty hard. I think that's a safe assessment. Okay. But I went ahead and did the assessment on it anyways, because I think it's worthwhile to see that everything has something, right? So the first part's pretty simple, and let me see if I can make this a little bigger. We got the basics. It's an IntelliKeys adapter. It describes what it does. I have a picture of it, although it's not actually a picture of it. It's a picture of the IntelliKeys. I talk about what organization developed it. That's me, AT Makers, PK Young Elementary, and Leanne Brewster up there at near the University of Florida actually shipped this. and they do the customer instruction, and they made the videos. So they need to be on here. There's nobody currently selling it, and so there's no links. This is the link to this video that we're currently on, because I thought it would be good to let people see the assessment video. I think that's actually pretty important. It means that if you fail to document something, at least there's a record of it that people can find.
I thought the assessment was actually going it over with the person. So the assessment is discussing the assessment document.
So the assessment here is, no, the assessment is finding the risks and documenting them, which is done before the person's ever involved, because you're doing this for something that is either a product or something that's going to be sent to many people. You follow?
Yeah, I guess the word assessment got
Sorry.
me.
So the risk assessment is the term that's used here, but we can talk about a briefing for the end user if you'd like. That's separate. But
I just when I saw that, that's what I imagined. So okay.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you, and listen, I came up with this. If it's not clear, stop me so that we make it clear. Okay. But no, this is about who is here. So like in this document, this very much will add, if it will let me stop it. Eric, Carson, whatever. Eric will update all these after the meeting and stuff. And we'll have whoever was here documented in this. The summary came last. It's overall safe device. There's a low risk of misuse. A warning is needed to ensure the IntelliKeys is not the only communication mechanism used in an emergency. This shows on the initial risk assessment where the risks fell, right? So most of them were either unlikely or the injury was trivial or both. This one risk was there as it's possible to cause a major injury. I think I might have been stretching, but it's fine. But afterwards, that is made less likely because we have the warning, and this is action items. And I give it to Eric just because I like picking on Eric.
Yeah.
But what are the action items needed in order to be able to claim that we've actually mitigated these risks? And that is, yes.
Real quick, why don't you show them the risk list?
Yeah. Well, I was going to go.
That feeds into that table.
Yeah. Okay. I will. So here you go. So here's what I actually found, and what I would like everybody to find when we do the next one is this second tab, which says risk list. And it starts out blank with a bunch of risk names and numbers. And you throw out to the crowd, what are the risks we have to look at, right? A keyboard can be damaged by a short. Absolutely. Right. It's property damage can occur. It is not very likely. We have spare keyboards and we can replace them here. So the risk of this really as an organization is very low. Computer being damaged by a short, the severity is higher because we may have to, worst case, pay to replace somebody's computer, I suppose, but it's very unlikely. Most USB ports have resettable fuses on them. Shorting them should not cause an injury, and we're not adding any power of our own. They're just USB ports. So that is unlikely. The last two here are emergency and non-emergency communication failure. So an emergency communication failure means that if this is the only way somebody can communicate and it fails, and they need to be able to say, hey, I need help, they can't. And this is here primarily because we've seen this. In fact, Chris is here. Wrong one. Chris is here. We see this right now. We've seen where if a product fails, some of our users are in a situation where the inability to communicate is a very real risk, and it is something we should be considering. Okay. Whoops. The last one here is non-emergency communication failure. And to be honest, I added it after the fact because I thought it would be good to split communication failure into two different risks. I can't think of any other ways to hurt yourself with this device. I'd actually love to throw it out to the crowd and see, did I miss anything here? Is there anything here that you guys can think? You guys know how this device works, correct? Is there anything that I'm missing?
You don't talk about cables. What about the cables that could get wrapped around somebody?
Okay. I don't provide the cables, but you're right. Short cable, so you're right about that one. Cable strangulation. Okay. Let's come back to the risks. What else? Anybody? Judy?
Just so I'm understanding, the way that we've mitigated the emergency communication failure is to warn the people up front that this should not be used.
It is. I haven't gotten to that point yet, so I haven't kind of talked through it. I thought with Mary Elizabeth coming up with something I missed, we'd finish that here for a second. Okay. We'll go through that in a second, Chris. Is there any other things that people are concerned
Fire.
about?
I mean, if you're doing electricity, it could happen.
So starting a fire with a USB port from a computer is a good trick.
What if they plug it into something that they shouldn't?
Okay. So USB. No, we'll go through and we'll do the.
I mean, that would be misuse. So you could say that in
doubt.
your notes that you had them.
Yep. Anything else? And it's good that you're coming up with this. I'm all good with this. Jake?
What about physical damage with maybe sharp corners of PCB? Or is it enclosed?
Try that again.
Is it an enclosed device, or are you selling the raw PCB? Like, would there be any physical damage with the actual corners of PCB, maybe?
So like an abrasion injury from the enclosure.
So, we are shipping it inside of this enclosure. I suppose this is awfully soft. Everything's rounded and stuff, but it's a good. I don't think that is a risk on this one, but it's good to think about for others, right? On people getting things that are sharp. Derek, Judy, anything?
Is there anything
or if the case
small?
breaks?
Jonathan, if the case breaks, can it hurt somebody? Is that the question?
Yeah, if the case breaks, then there could be a sharp edge or something like that. So if you're using it in a context where there's mobility, like a wheelchair or something, and then it falls underfoot and gets crushed, then I'm just, that's why we're doing.
Okay, so cutting risk. You guys, cutting risk if case is damaged. All right. So then the next step here is once did somebody say another one?
Would there be any risk in this individual using this without another individual in the area?
So one of the ways it can be helpful to think about this is what is sort of separate that risk into harm, like hazard harm. So what would the injury be to someone? And then what's the hazard? What's the sequence of events that would lead to that? So I think the sequence there is, some isolation piece. What would you imagine the harm being there, Judith?
I think once we've said that you can't use it as an emergency call device, I don't see any added risk of a person using it in isolation than using it with someone in the room with them.
Yeah, I think it's the same.
Once we've separated out that particular issue, I don't think having someone present during its use is going to have any difference. And keep in mind, we're talking about the translation device, not necessarily the use of the IntelliKeys.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, right?
Yeah, we're just talking about that little adapter. And the IntelliKeys device itself is a completely separate thing.
Right.
Okay.
So we have to worry about if our part fails, right? So if it's not a matter of this heavy thing might fall. Like the IntelliKeys is not a small thing, right? So IntelliKeys is this monster thing, right? if this falls, could it hurt somebody? Yes. Could it, fall on a medical device and break it? Yes. But that's not our concern. Our concern is this device used properly, right? If it fails or if it's misused in an unexpected way, how could somebody get hurt?
The only other thing to add would be installation recommendation would be don't use power tools.
Okay.
Because you have to screw, you attach that to the, you unscrew a screw and then
Right.
you put it back on, right?
Yep.
To mount it.
Okay. So
you just don't want to break the device.
we can cycle back through this in a second, but let's I like this one. Let's go ahead and put some numbers on these. And again, we're just doing these columns. We're just doing the initial guess of how likely is this to happen and how bad an issue is it if it occurs. Okay. The how bad it is for strangulation, it's a 3. It's potential death, right? Now, we are not shipping a long cord with this. We are shipping a 1-foot cord with it. And so the likelihood of strangulation with this one, I think, is low. It's not 0, right? But I think it's not likely. You guys, so it should be on the list, but it should be rated as not likely. Does that sound right?
Okay.
Mary Elizabeth? Thumbs up. Okay. All right. Fire risk from USB. Well, fire is hazardous, right? I think that is very low as it is, but we could mitigate it. We could add a fuse. We could add a resettable fuse. Actually, to be honest, we could look and see if these trinkets have a resettable fuse on them. They probably do, right? In which case, then even if we shorted our circuits here, we would still never pull more than 2 amps. So we can investigate that. So put a note over here that simply says, check if trinket has a resettable fuse on it. Trinket's what we used inside of that device. This one was a keep cable less than 1 foot. But I think the risk is low of a fire from this. If it's not, every single one of our devices, we need to really take a good look at this. Thoughts? I'm going to go with this. All right. Cutting risk if the case is damaged. I don't think the severity actually is nearly as high as a fire or strangulation. So can we say a 2? And the likelihood is still very small that would break and hurt somebody. I actually think this installation injury is probably more likely, and the severity is less. Does that sound right? So, any thought on the cutting risk where it should be? A 1 or a 2?
Oh, I think it should be a 1.
It should be a 1. Okay. So this is a better list than what I did. We should make some notes over here that says cutting risk. If the case is damaged, ensure all corners are rounded, which they are. And installation injury, recommend not using power tools in warning. Okay, now let's assume we're right here. We can argue about it later. This is a test one that I don't really think is that critical. If we are right here, the procedure that I put on the first page says any risks where the risk level is above a 4 or higher, complete a detailed risk tab using the risk template. So we go over here. The only one here that's higher than a 4 is this one, which is a 6. And so we have a template here called the risk template. And I've gone ahead and done this, but let me walk through what this is. You can't see it all, so let me turn us off for a second. So this tab spends the time to actually do the analysis on this risk. So what's the risk? Describe it. In this case, if the IntelliKeys keyboard is the only means of communication and the dongle fails, the user will not be able to request help. What environments does this matter? In medical settings, home settings, people with complex bodies, kind of anywhere. But if you're, all others, I guess we can put all in here because it's not really environment specific. Who can be harmed? The person we're worried about here is the AT user. There's no way that this scenario can hurt a bystander or a caregiver or anything else like that, right? This is going to hurt the actual AT user. How can they be harmed? Inability to request help in an emergency may cause severe injury. How likely is it? We chose it was a 2. How severe is it? It's a 3. And then the big question is, what controls can we put in place to mitigate the hazard? So I have this section over here, which I completely ripped off from the Irish folks who do risk mitigation. And I'll turn us back on for a second. But the idea here is to start at the top and work your way down. So the things at the top are the most effective things that you can do. And the things at the bottom are the least effective things that you can do. And unfortunately, the things at the bottom are also the easiest things to do. And the things at the top are the hardest things to do. Right? But this reminds you of what we need to be looking at in terms of mitigating these risks. Before I go through them, does this make sense to everybody? Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thumbs up. Good deal. All right. So the first is elimination. And this is something that I would think we will do very little, but it was repeated both in the class that I took on this and in the videos that you have to ask this question every time, because what ends up happening is for some risks, they are completely unnecessary and they are vestigial. They are there because some past thing that you used to do needed this. And somebody in the room says, why don't we just stop doing that? Or why don't we use a different part? We don't even need to do this anymore. So is there any way to completely eliminate this risk? No.
This is the Elon Musk version of how to do engineering. He says that the best part is no part at all. And he tells a story about things that went into Tesla that they spent days upon days trying to engineer better production methods. And it was a bottleneck in production. And after they wasted all this time trying to optimize the production of a part, they suddenly realized they didn't need the part in the first place. So
yeah, it's kind of. I haven't heard that pitch. If you have a link or something, please share it later.
Yes,
it also, interestingly, it's also the lesson pricks approach to employee management. We need fewer employees. That's very, very much what we do, right? If we can eliminate them, even the ones we love, we will. I'll get rid of Eric in a minute. But that's not true, but only because I can't. So substitution.
You need Eric more than Eric needs you.
So can we replace the hazard with one that is less dangerous and less likely? I'm not sure that applies here. Engineering, can we reduce the likelihood of this hazard by physically changing the device or the environment? In a lot of cases, this is what we want to do, right? A good example from the Irish group was they were talking about forklifts and people in the warehouse. Can you engineer a barrier that keeps the forklifts and the pedestrians separate? Can you physically do something that changes this and reduces the likelihood of this happening? In this case,
things like building a case with rounded corners would be
so that's not the risk that we're on. We're only looking at the emergency communication. But if we were looking at charts,
as an example,
absolutely.
That's an engineer. That's an example of how we mitigate something through engineering.
Yep, absolutely. Or put a fuse in place. In fact, I mean, I honestly think that in many of the toy adaptations that we do, when we actually are dealing with the power of the device and not a signal line, we should be putting a fuse in line. It would cost us 30 cents and stop a fire hazard, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah. Administration and policy. Can we design policies that make this risk less likely? This is more about projects than it is about products, because we can't enforce things once we give a product to a customer. But if we were doing a toy adaptation, we should be doing this as well, and we should be looking at things like, what are the risks that people are going to get burned by a soldering iron, right? They have. We've done adaptations. We had kids burned by soldering irons, right? What can we do to administratively, make sure that they're following procedures and that we're training them to make that less likely. It's really hard on a product to use this stripe, because I don't really know that we can police our end users' behavior. In some scenarios, like classrooms or with so I guess that's not true. There's one case I can think of here where we kind of did this. We had a device that we would only distribute to occupational therapists. We would not distribute it to end users because we just knew it was too dangerous of an item. Judy, you might remember it. It was a head turning device. It removed all lateral friction from somebody moving their head, which is fabulous unless, we went to Max's house and tried it and it worked great, but also your head would move way faster than it should if it wasn't being cared for. So administratively, we could limit who we distribute to, which I guess would be a good use for this stripe. And then the last is warnings. And warnings, we've got to do better at warnings. We don't warn anybody on anything that we ship out. And that's me. That's I. So AT Makers does not do a good job of warning people on risks inherent to the devices. In this case, does anybody see anything more effective than a warning that we could do on the emergency communication failure?
I mean, the other mitigation or risk control from a medical device lens is typically like training as well. So if there was some sort of thing that's at or maybe just above like a warning, that could be something where you.
So that would be a policy that you
go
require
through.
training before you'll deliver the product.
Yeah, something like that.
I think it's a good one to add into here.
Like the video tutorial that they have to sit through before they purchase it.
Right. Add training tutorial before purchase. And maybe not even require. Just I think the minute that you provide it, that's helping, right? Providing the training helps reduce your risk. Requiring it is another step further, right? But it probably should be, it is at least as important to provide it than I'm not sure. I'm just not sure how much we can police whether people pay any attention to it. But we could claim that we required that they check a box. That might help us in court, but it's not going to help keep people safe, right? So at the very least, this is something where, to us, this is a misuse. Using this device in a situation where there is no other form of communication is something that we want to warn people about and say, this device can fail. If it does, you won't have communication on this IntelliKeys. Therefore, you must have another means of emergency communication if it's going to be used, right? So, Chris, you on board with that?
Yeah, I'm like that. Is there a route we could go? Suppose we come up with something, not this particular project, but something that has a level of risk that is bothersome to us, and we're having trouble mitigating it. Is there a route we can go where we license it to the person and then they have to sign some agreement that says they will only use it in certain ways? Does that protect us in any way?
So hold on a second. Hold on. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. So the first answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I have asked that question repeatedly. What I do know is waivers will not protect us. Okay. Getting a waiver from somebody that signs something and say you take the risk of this will not protect us legally.
Okay.
It did years
Well, then I
ago.
wouldn't think
It
a
doesn't
license-
anymore. There's
I
a
wouldn't think I-
difference. So there are other options here, right? There is manufacturer for hire, where the work that we do is theirs and they own it and they hired us to put it together, but they are in much more the owner of that product than we are. There are probably other ways to mitigate this, and one of the questions is, when we get a product that we cannot mitigate this, what do we do? My first answer to that is we
Just
say
don't.
no.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to this. Let's finish up on the risk assessment we have, and then let's get back into this for a second. Okay.
Yeah. Right. You asked what can we do besides warning, and that's where I went.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think it's a good question. I think there's a better place to address it. Okay.
Okay.
But I don't see anything better, which to me meant that here. All right, we have an action item, which is we need to produce warnings and a note, a label and a note. It says, while warnings are least effective controls, we do not see an alternative. This hazard is true with any AAC device. It should be common money. So intended. Sorry, that's not a word. Why didn't it? Intended isn't a word, is it? Intended. User's warning should be in the packaging and attached to the adapter housing with a sticker. So we can talk through all of that in the notes. But we have looked. So if somebody looked at this, they could honestly, let me go back here. Sorry. They could look at this and say, okay, yeah, there absolutely were. In this case, I would put, we came up with R5 through R8. I would put them up here wherever it is. So this is unlikely and major injury. So you put in R5. So we go, I'm not going to do all these right now, but we'd update this diagram, right? Then we'd update this one after we mitigated it. And that will automatically come up here into this table because they're just references, right? When we were done with this, we would have thought through it and we would have proof that we have thought through these issues. If we come up with an action item that we then never do, we're screwed. We can't do that, right? We can't come up with an action item and not actually accomplish it. So we need to have follow-up here to make sure that whatever it is we say we're going to do to mitigate this actually happens. And then I think we publish this thing publicly, right? We put this someplace where if people want to use our products, they can see this. In addition to whatever warnings we give, the more transparent we are on this, especially as nonprofits and not, people who aren't selling these, I think that making these public is a good idea. Jake, specifically, comments on that?
I was just jotting down a note about thinking about adding that to our sort of like documentation template.
Yeah, I think it would be a really good link for you to have on your projects, that if there's been a risk assessment, somebody should be made available to the people who might make it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that level of transparency and encouraging it. I think that's a conversation with lawyers, though, to make sure that that's not
agreed. Yeah, and you're a subsidiary of Neil Squire, right? So there's a separate entity that needs to care about that there, right? Okay, let's talk about something that has more inherent risks, which would lead us to the conversations that we were just having with Chris. Did I lose Chris? Oh, Jonathan is gone, and
I'm here.
Chris, you're there. Why aren't you on the?
I'm on the screen.
I don't. Oh, gee, it moved when I switched there and back. I've been in the upper left corner the whole time, so I didn't even look there. So sorry. I don't like it when it does that. I think when Jonathan left, it reshuffled us. Here, there you go. Now you're back where you're supposed to be. Get back down there. So I know all Chris is thinking about right now is Hollywood Squares. I know it. I know that's what he's thinking about right now. So, right?
You're dating me.
Am I,
You're calling
but am I wrong?
I'm more Brady Bunch than
All right,
I'm
Brady
Rich Bunch.
Bunch, fair enough. All right, let's talk about a more dangerous device. I have two that I'll let you guys pick what we're going to talk about here. Okay, so I have this lovely switch, which is distributed by many of us. I think the original design is one of Jake's. Yeah. Or this device, which I determined was so dangerous that I decided not to ship it, which is a USB device that will control a power chair. What's the word? What do you think? Let's start with this. Jake, are you willing to do this?
I mean, I don't think we ever did a formal risk assessment on the Switch.
Yeah,
so
and the truth is, I think it'll be on all the switches. So
I think there's value in doing that because it should apply to just about any switch that we create.
This device right here. So sorry about being so. I am trying to juggle OBS and StreamYard and not drive myself insane. But this device actually has two digital potentiometers, and basically the opposite of the Freedom Wing, and it's the one that I made first before they asked me for a Freedom Wing, and I can drive a power chair with it, and it's super cool. But if I release this to the wild, as useful as it is, it would not pass my personal risk assessment. So
you can drive a power chair with the Switch.
That's exactly right. But you can't do anything else with this. There is no safe use for this. Fair enough?
Okay.
Maybe? Okay. Yes? Okay. All right. Let's do this one. Let's just do a switch. And sorry. There you go. All right. So we want, let's say, this view. We want to go to the risk assessment template. So make a copy. We'll call this teardrop. What's it called? Teardrop switch?
It's
What's it
raindrop.
called?
Yeah, raindrop.
Raindrop.
Vancouver
Raindrop
weather
switch.
inspired.
Risks. And share it with the same people. And sure, I don't have any comments. Doesn't matter. All right. I'm just going to put this one thing in here. Raindrop switch. And we'll put a picture later and we can fill all this in. As far as the people who are here, just put the date in, 224 gang. And Eric can fill it in later. Minus Jonathan. Because he left. He said goodbye, by the way, for anybody who did. All right, so we've started this. We'll fill these in as we go. Let's start with some risks. All right. Let's start with easy risks first.
Choking hazard.
Yeah, definitely a choking hazard. That's a good first one.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If the cap comes off.
Yeah, I don't know any way to do. Is it this? No. There is no good way to do this. I'm sorry, but we'll do it this way. Choking hazard.
Yeah, so specifically choking on the cap.
For the button, right? So if the green cap comes off, it would be a choking hazard, right? Another one, strangulation, because it's got a long cord, right? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Others.
So I would say one of the things you may want to consider here is instead of sort of starting from everything, it would make sense to start from what that intended use is.
Okay.
because that will sort of limit the scope here. And I don't
Yep.
know if we've ever sort of been explicit about that, but I think that would be something we could add to this template, is what is the intended use case for this particular switch.
Yep. Oops.
Because that will still kind of define what is normal use and what is
Right, or if this is being used for an AAC device or a
Yep.
wheelchair.
Yep. So that's the environmental. It lets us define the misuse scenarios, which need to go in the risks. But you're right. It does do that. So you're the initial guide, Jake. What's the
so the intended use for this is specifically nothing to do with mobility devices.
okay? So
So fun.
technology use other than
So this
mobility?
is for computer access and
right. I think this is the wrong way to define it. Right. This is technology.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know I don't know the standard way of defining what is sort of
communication,
out of scope,
entertainment, educational use. How about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's
Non-moving.
a good point.
So okay. So let's add this over here as a misuse, and I'm just going to put a misuse mobility mobility control. Good. All right. What else do we put into this intended use? We can list things like adapted toys, or things like that, but
Environmental controls.
Environmental controls for so okay.
What if you're connected to a device that is not a switch interface? Then you connect that to some other input device.
Sorry. If you connect it to a device that what?
That is not a switch interface. It's a 3.5 millimeter jack. For example, as a audio player, and then you damage the device.
You're right. Yeah, so that's a good risk. So this would be damage by inserting into audio jack. Fair enough? Or similar.
Oh, yes.
Okay. It's going to damage some other device by using it in an audio jack.
Well, or just any other jack other than assistive technology device.
Right. So just any other 3.5 millimeter jack to a non. How about just into a non AT jack?
Yes.
I.e. Audio jacks. Make sense?
Yeah.
Judy, anything? No. So,
I guess, somebody, well, that wouldn't be the user that would misuse it, but somebody else getting their hands on it could cause some damage, poking themselves in the eye, all that kind of stuff. But I think that gets so broad, then you couldn't do anything.
poking. Okay. So the trick here is get them on the list, right? And even if we put zeros on the likelihood, they're on the list. It means we've considered them. Documenting the fact that we've considered them is a good thing, right? Overall. Oh, you guys can't see this. I'm sorry. All right. So
abrasion risk from the like abrasion to the finger. That could also be like a chronic use injury as well.
Finger edges. You're right on that, by the way. Probably this thing has no way to mount it, right? There's no way to reliably mount it, so it's going to be held on by Velcro or sticky tack or something else. So I think a couple of things we need to look at would be accidental activation due to mount failure. The thing is, this is one of those things where the situation completely determines whether that has 0 severity or deadly severity, right? But it certainly might be a way to help us mitigate the damage in a dangerous scenario, would be to add a way to effectively mount it. Would be an engineering thing. Eric, you haven't said anything on this list.
Yeah, I was actually going the other way in my head. I was like, if the mount fails and you have the inability to actuate the switch.
So that's the same emergency communication.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next suggestion is this has the same emergency communication risk as the other device has.
Yep.
I mean, if this is your inner's power button.
Yep.
As a misuse, though.
Yes.
So here's the interesting thing. I agree with you, but I'm staring at I'm staring at 1, 2, and then Jonathan left. I was going to say I'm staring at 3 people who have misused these switches.
No argument there, and I think that's because there's that lack of intended use and the lack of warnings. So,
but
full agreement. But that's the scope
Yep.
here. Is it's not intended to be used for those.
By the way, the reason that one of the big reasons that I did this, and Chris, I don't know if you know this story, here, but I went and visited you, and we did that tour. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And the last time I was there, we had made this, right? This is the cutie pie hat.
Yeah.
With the infrared. And you showed me the fact that you used this device to activate your emergency call to get your sister to come in or Barb to come in, right? And all I could think of was, what if it doesn't work? What if my soldering is bad and he can't do the emergency call, right?
Well, actually, I'm not using it that way. I'm using the old Arduino unit.
Okay, well, I feel better now. I won't feel as guilty, right? But it's important to think about that because.
But those sling rings that you just made for me do activate my call button.
Right, absolutely, right. So you're misusing the sling rings that I made.
Oh, definitely.
So then the question becomes, what do we do when and this comes back to what you had said about can we do it under a license or something like that? I think you said the license. It might have been. It's a really good question, right? It's a really good question for the argument that says, what about when no matter what switch it is, no matter how unlikely it is to fail, that is an inherent risk of putting any switch in there that it can fail. And there's a concept in negligence. It's a defense called assuming the risk. And basically it says, under some circumstances, like a good example would be demolition derby, right? That isn't just a waiver, right? That no, you're doing something inherently dangerous and you're never going to sue the car manufacturer when you slam it into another car, right?
Yeah.
The problem with it is it has been eroded over the years by waivers until the fact that, and this is just one opinion, I would check the box, but I've done it too many times this time. My professor basically said, in almost all cases, assuming the risk really is a different defense. Whether that's there was no duty to be careful, he didn't breach the standard of care, or it wasn't the cause of the harm. In other words, assuming the risk, it's not a good defense in most negligence cases. We might not be most negligence cases, right? We might very well be. So I was like, excellent. Sorry, so let me put some of these up here in a second too. I'm getting comments that I wasn't watching. We might be in a situation where we need to come up as a community with a solution and find an attorney to answer the question and pay them. Finding them, I'm in a better position for now, having done the Stetson law thing, to say, okay, what is the situation when somebody wants to do something inherently dangerous? I'll give you an example. Yvette Haas posted this just a second ago. It says accidental continued activation if it gets dirty or sticky. Okay, and we're going to add that, right? And we'll add as a second one here. Well, I'll add it in a second. Let's talk for a second. The reason that she brought this up is we were talking about this the other day. This happened to her. Her power chair first had a joystick that started drifting. So this is a $6,000 joystick on a $30,000 chair, and it started drifting. And when she was sitting still, it would move suddenly, it would inch forward. And she wasn't touching the joystick. And so Yvette, I hope you're okay with me telling the story. She went to her mobility provider. They said, okay, we'll get you a new joystick. And it took them months to get it, of course, because they're a DME provider, right? In the meantime, during that time, she switched to using switch control to move her power chair. And the switches she used, one of them, when she was outside on the beach, and she's totally fine with me telling it, because of the humidity, stuck. And several times over the period of the months she was waiting for the joystick, she had minor injuries or caused minor damage in her home because the switch stuck in the on position, right? Her argument was, I'm taking that risk on no matter what switch, and I know it, right? And I think that's, she can correct me if that's not what she said.
It's the same risk you take when you drive on one tires or bad brakes or, anything that you failed to maintain on your car, or, that through normal wear and tear, things are going to fail.
Yeah. Do you think your joystick's going to fail?
Mine?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so is that part of your, it's part of your reality that you keep track of?
Now, this particular joystick has been amazingly reliable over the 6 years that I've been using it. But the first power chair I had was basically a non-proportional. It was switch controlled. I mean, you pushed a joystick, but the joystick was triggering one or two micro switches. Was the way it was designed. We're talking, what, 1965? Yeah, 1965. And if you would push the joystick too hard, those micro switches would stick and you would go flying across the room. And that was just part of everyday life. One time I went up a big ramp at school where my chair was not fully charged. And halfway up the ramp, I blew a fuse. And then I started rolling down the ramp backwards, because in those days, chairs didn't have braking systems. So, these are, I always, I don't like being near a curb. I don't like being on a sidewalk where there's a ditch next to it. Anywhere that I'm outdoors driving, that I go, that there's something I can roll off and get hurt. I don't like it, and I only do it if I have to. But that's just part of life I've lived.
I remember reading that story in your blog, Chris, about your wheelchair going down the ramp backwards.
Yeah.
So we got a comment from Brady Fulton. We all know Brady Fulton. Hi, Brady. You should be on this call, but whatever. It says mitigation could be providing a maintenance recommendation. So that's actually a thought that says you know, when how long you expect that joystick. You have an idea. Hey, this joystick's been around too long. It's been 12 years. I'm going to need a new joystick, right? Do we have an expected lifetime on something like a Switch?
I mean, we don't, but that's another, I keep bringing up medical devices, and ultimately that's the lens that we're going to start needing to look at these things through. The EU is already there, and I imagine Canada and US won't be that far behind. Yeah, your anticipated life cycle is absolutely something that needs to be thought of and documented. Same with maintenance and cleaning and the rest of it, right?
Because we've already said that using the Switch for mobility purposes is a misuse. So
Yeah.
what do we need to do beyond that? Is this an argument we don't need to have? I mean, the better question is, what if any recourse do we have if the user does misuse it?
Yeah, so again, from a medical device point of view, that's the purpose of that intended use statement. Is if someone's using things normal use or off-label use, then their liability risk is less. Not a lawyer, but that's my understanding of
Oh, you want the checkbox there? You got it. There you go.
So I think that's, if there's any takeaways here tonight, I think having an intended use statement for each of the devices wherever it lives, and those warnings is, in conjunction with this risk assessment process, that's at least a step in the right direction of kind of limiting the scope of what these devices are intended to be used of, and really drawing that line in the sand is like, it should really not be used for anything that has these high severity risk cases, right?
I think certainly I'm glad we added it. I think that there are two different pieces to that, right? One is state the intended use. I think we lost Judy. I hope she comes back. But state the intended use, state the but also when we've identified a risk beyond stating the intended use, we should mark it, right? Specifically when we know things are like here. Let me show you this picture again here. There's lots of things that are on here that aren't going to be without risk, right? But if we have something that's going to cause major injury, right? Even no matter how unlikely it is, if it's going to cause major injury, we should warn them, right? And I think mobility is the number one of those. It's the number one thing that I don't know how to solve. And I think what we might have to do is just simply warn them and say, this isn't supported for that. Don't use it for that. And then when we have a request for a mobility project, and we have tons of them, right? One of the problems you'll find is that go to AT Makers, the people who want mobility solutions is a ton. And Chris, I'm looking at your neck. You're surrounded by mobility solutions, right?
Yeah. There's a message right now on the AT Makers board.
Yep.
A woman wants a mode switch, a kill switch, and the microlight isn't working for her anymore, and she wants something to replace it.
Yep. Her name's Laura Dawson. I'm going to go bring it up here so people can see. But yes, I know the post you're talking about.
I didn't answer it. I had plenty of ideas.
Right.
So I'm not going to answer it. Sorry, whoever you are.
Yeah. So I'm looking at Laura Watson. Here's the post. I'll bring it up here. I think. Let me see. So here it's I have SMA. I'm revamping everything. I'm using EMG to control my power chair. I need a mode switch. I need another option. And here's the thing. We have this. Chris is using it nightly, I think, right? The sensor that you have on your cheek would work here, right?
Well, I was thinking a swing ring with one of my micro switches.
Absolutely,
because
right?
She needs something mounted to her hand, so her hand position, if her hand moves, the button stays in her hand.
Oh, the other thing I was thinking about this, Chris, is, and I know we're breaking our own rule here, right? And Jake's having a fit, but
Yeah.
I'm looking at your picture right now, Chris. I can do this. Right,
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking at your joystick.
Yeah.
Your holder for that joystick would probably give her great control of her power chair.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
she said she has great facial motion and everything else. If she's got good motion of her lips, wouldn't your solution there be better than any EMG solution?
Yeah. Now, there is a commercially made version of what I'm wearing. And the reason I have a homemade one was it was easier for me to make one than to adapt to the other one that didn't fit me.
Okay.
But, so, we can recommend to her the commercially available version of what I'm using as a basic way to drive.
So maybe we should take a takeaway and maybe give it to I'll give it to Mary Elizabeth as an action item because she has nothing better to do from now till August. So, maybe the answer is we need to think about mobility separate and say, let's see if we can't get somebody with great personal skills who's nice and friendly and not me to reach out to some mobility companies and say, can we feed them designs? Right. And I don't even care if they don't have to be cheap mobility companies. I don't care. Okay. I really am. I'm giving up on this should be cheap. I mean, at this point, this should be available. Okay. When it comes to other things
It's
other
like
than mobility.
You saw the TED Talk I posted yesterday.
Yes, I did. I saw the TED Talk you posted. It was fantastic. Everybody should watch it with the young man in Europe somewhere.
I don't know where he's from. And some foreign accent.
Yeah. So it's fantastic. It's about what mobility changed for his life. It's wonderful. But maybe we should actually reach out to a custom mobility company, somebody who makes these ridiculously expensive devices, and say, we got a dozen designs here that work that we can't distribute.
Yeah.
You've got poor quality products. Don't say it that way, Mary Elizabeth. You have poor quality products that don't solve problems, and you have people who don't even recommend the products that you do have and say things like, she needs to learn to use the joystick for Ella Hunt, right?
Yeah.
Can we get something where we have any kind of a partnership with them that says, let's actually try and work together on some of these things that we know we can't do this.
Yeah.
Joe, Mary Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts on that? You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I've often wondered and marveled how these other companies are able to charge so much for so little, and the lack of support. I think we've all seen that, but still they're doing it. Yeah, this comes
so what about this? What about reaching out to PerMobile, like one of the big ones, and saying, we're not going to complain about your high price on these. You can charge whatever you want for them, right? Because you're DME, you're going to charge the Medicaid anyways. You're going to charge DME prices no matter what. And if their prices are absurd, we can actually do fundraising to help people buy stuff. But it bothers me that there seems to be no way to get these solutions safely to the mobility users. Thoughts?
I think part of the challenge there is if the level of like quality management and rigor and risk assessment that you do to sort of mitigate those improvements safe is expensive. And that's
do you think they do them?
Absolutely. And if they don't, they're catching up on that, right? So if you look at AbleNet now and a bunch of others, they're doing that regulatory stuff so they can sell to the EU, and part of that is complying with medical device risk assessment.
Maybe what we need to do is put together a group of people like me and
Ian Price,
Ian up in Canada and McBride, and say, make us your focus group. When you put out a product, run it by us and let us tell you why it sucks or why it doesn't.
Yeah, pitch it like that, Chris.
You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
But I mean, do they, we've all seen the classic cartoons of, what the engineer designed versus what was really needed,
Yeah.
And, we need to get end users in the loop on these product designs. And maybe it's suggested, we come up with suggested designs that we would, give to them open source to develop, or maybe it's just have a focus group.
Yeah.
Anything new they build, they write by us.
And sadly, only the Canadians can take any money for that, right?
I don't know.
Well, you can't.
No, I can't.
Right.
No.
So I don't know whether the can or not. But
we're getting kind of late here.
yes, we are. And nobody's going to pay any attention to us if we keep talking. I did get a comment from Yvette Haas saying he agrees with everything he says about how he avoids driving near the edge of curbs, etc., because she's always aware of the risk. And Brady Fulton asks if Makers Making Change has activation cycle tests. Jake?
Yeah, so we had developed a little test machine to test one of our switches. It's not something we've done like rigorously, but we kind of use that as a tool as part of a design improvement cycle to look at.
Well, I think actually would be useful.
Right? Like,
one thing that would be useful for that, if you did it, would be to know whether it's more likely to fail on or off. Right. So to me, failing in an off position is infinitely less danger than failing in an on position. And we knew the likelihood of that, it might actually change how we classify some of our risks. Right. So I'm just curious. But I think so. We are going pretty far afield from where we started. So let's try and bring this back around. We are not going to finish this assessment tonight. I do think we should. We should absolutely do this. We're not going to do it live for everybody to watch. But I'm going to share the links to this with you folks. I'd love it if we continue this. I have a second question, which is, and I'd like to find this out over the next week. How do we do this asynchronously, right? Like finding the risks is pretty easy to do right now when we talk this through. I think it really helps, and I would always recommend it. But the act of evaluating the risks and coming up with the mitigations, we probably need to be able to do after the call, or have a follow-up call. And the problem, and Eric loves that idea. He loves the idea because there's more meetings involved. Okay. But everybody else on here hates the idea and knows that if we make this process onerous, it won't happen. Right. If we make it something where this is too much work to do these evaluations, it simply won't happen. So I think the answer is going to be that some part of this is going to have to be done asynchronously by email after the fact. I think that shared editing of these files would help quite a bit so that people can edit on place. Mary Elizabeth, I can't hear you. You're saying something funny and your father is cracking up. That's not nice.
Here, Dad, when he was talking, you cut him off and he wanted to say something that he thought was important that he's going to share with you now.
All right.
I was going down the rabbit hole, but I was trying to reinforce what Chris said, offering members of the group, users, as a built-in focus group. Have a resume, have for the group, and then at least offer it to these people who are selling these expensive devices. And also, as a side note, to try and figure out exactly how much are they paying for their insurance and all.
Their liability.
Well, yeah. So one of the questions that I said years ago to somebody who was the argument back. So I got the argument from somebody that said, yeah, but we pay for liability insurance, and that's why these things are so expensive. And my response was, can I see your deck page? Right? Let me see how much. What are your limits of liability? Who is your carrier? Prove it. Right? Prove the fact that you're carrying these expenses. And I got crickets. And as somebody who could have answered that question, but I think you're right. In what does it cost to do the liability insurance? And I do know. So Eric and I, what was the woman in California's name? This is why I keep you around, man. It's your only job is to remember the details. You're muted if you're saying anything.
I've got it in email. I have to do research. I don't keep that stuff on the top of my head.
All right. We spoke to a nice woman in California who does product liability insurance. And one of the things was there was no way to do that if this stuff's made by a group of high school kids, right? You've got to have a process of manufacturing. You got to be able to document it. It has to be repeatable and documented. But then there was no problem with nonprofits getting liability insurance. That wasn't an issue at all. And she was happy to give us quotes. We didn't pursue it because at the time we were having this conversation, most of our products were being made by high school robotics teams. And some of them still are.
Maureen Bernstein.
What's that?
Maureen Bernstein.
Maureen Bernstein. See that? Thank you, Eric. Sorry I called you out. I'm really mean to Eric all the time. This is not new. And anybody who so he's just there to get picked on. Maureen Bernstein was good enough to help us with that. I think, Joe, if your comment was maybe we should carry liability insurance and just do this, I think that may be a part of this solution, right? I don't think we all have to do that. I think that if anybody here was working with a company who was focusing on mobility, we could farm all of these designs to one group that carried the risk and did the extra testing and evaluation, right? Right? And Mary Elizabeth, you're still. Don't let Joe go off on a rant again. But I do think that's
Our
worth
liability insurance for, I mean, not getting into specifics, but for up to 40 users for what we were using it for was about $4,500 a year. And that
for the number. When you say the number of users, define that.
So for 40 users.
Of your end users.
End users, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So $4,500 for 40 users is a significant amount of money that you need to add into every product, right?
And that's for oh, you mean split up among everyone, among the 40 end users.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say it's $4,000, 40 users, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's still $100 you got to add to every device you ship.
Right.
Just to cover that, right?
Right.
And I'm well aware that the markup is radically higher than that on mobility items, Joe. I'm with you. But I also know that most of us look at the things that we're talking about, like this switch, and cannot imagine that kind of a markup, right? So we can't do that. We have to give the intended use stuff. So you have to, yeah. All right. What's next, guys?
I just wanted to, because we've had this discussion before internally, and one thing to keep in mind is there is this like ethical thing of whether or not to create a solution for someone, because it's not like it's kind of even if it exists or it doesn't exist. In some cases, like the greater benefit is if the device exists, and so it's always going to be this balancing act of managing that risk and also like creating something for someone. And I don't know, so that the traditional ways of dealing with that may not be the most reliable here. So it'd be nice to have a way, whether it's a license or a liability form or whatever combination, that we can still do this type of work and not get stuck in.
Yeah. I think if we could separate, honestly, if we could separate our day-to-day AT projects from these high risk environments, which is basically emergency alert and mobility. And if there's others, tell me, right? Because I can't think of any other big areas that are. We're not going to do medical devices, right? Like true medical devices. I have done one. David Beckauer got something that technically was a medical device modified by me. His suction device I modified for him, and that was probably a mistake on my part. I did get a waiver from him. He's a law school graduate, and he drafted a waiver for me, and it was very clear. But I think that if we can separate it and make our default, right, clearly labeled for communication, the things we said in this note, I'll give you the list again here. Communication, entertainment, education, and environmental control. I think if that is our default, then our risk assessments become reasonable and we can do them quickly. And everything else says our mitigation is if somebody asks for it in one of these high risk domains, we refer them to X. And we work with X, who carries extra liability and is set up in a way to work specifically with mobility, and that we all have a solution, right? I mean, there's no reason that makers making change and AT makers have to have different solutions to this, right? So that's something I'd like to think about. On the actual risk assessments, do you guys agree that this is worthwhile even for our non-mobility projects?
We have to do it for everything.
We have to do it for everything.
Everything that we do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that video call like this is the major way to do it. We need to do it on Discord. Something other than the public forum where we can, edit the email chain. I would rather have set up a private message board or a Discord server or something where we can communicate with one another. And
there's pros and cons to that. I think you're right that it will make more of these happen if we do that.
I mean, the end result goes public, like you said.
Right.
And we may start with a video chat, go work on it for a week, and follow up with a video chat. But this is not the forum to do this because we barely got one done, and we've been at it an hour and 45 minutes.
I agree. And Brady Fulton posted firearm triggering device because he's a smart ass. So we like him. He's absolutely a smart ass. And yes, I did help Mike Phillips fire a gun, and I would do it again in a minute. It also was one of the least dangerous things that I have ever done in AT because the amount of control in that environment was ridiculous. Much less dangerous than handing these out and letting people use them on their power chairs. So, but yeah. So thank you for piping up, smartass. All right. He can be the next Eric. We can pick on Brady from now on. So Eric will be fine with that. All right. I think we're good. I think let's do this. I will share the link to the updated, I'll update the risk template. I will, a risk assessment template. I will send out a link to this raindrop switch assessment as well. And then let's have one of these again. Let's have a follow-up to this. We can do it. We can do it in StreamYard without streaming it to the YouTube and Facebook if that's easier. I do think this is a very good forum for it, and it does mean this one is very good to have done public because I think this is a conversation that can be shared with people in slightly different areas. Adafruit, it can be shared with people in education who can give us other ideas of how other people are addressing this. But for the follow-up, we can do it without the stream if that helps people stay involved. Anything else?
Yeah, I had a quick comment. Yeah. Is it true that these risk assessments, if you go through various devices, are going to be the same or very similar?
So certainly for switches, a lot of the switches. Let me do this way so we can see. A lot of the switches will have the same environmental issues, right? No matter how we make the switch, all of them are going to have the issue that if you're using it on a power chair, it adds too much risk. But there are definitely going to be risks of other switches, of other devices, like an adapted toy, right? So if I adapt a toy and I'm taking the signal lines and adding switches to them, the likelihood of me causing damage with that are low. If I've got a bubble blower and I'm taking 12 volts at 3 amps and running it through a little switch with a little tiny wire, yeah, I actually have a fire hazard, and we've never documented that risk. We certainly can start with a library of risks and mitigations that we can pull into these things to make these go faster.
Yeah.
But the idea that there's any of them that we can skip, I think, is an invitation to a problem. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah.
You don't have to like my answer. Just,
Yeah.
I'd like to play poker with Joe. I make a lot of money playing poker with Joe. But, all right. I Mary Elizabeth too, so for that matter.
Our heart in our sleeves.
Yeah, exactly right.
Right, you don't know, I'm a poker player.
There you go.
You never done poker before.
well, I'll be up there in April. We'll play poker.
Okay.
So, all right, I'm gonna call it, and I'm gonna kill the stream. We'll stay on here for a couple minutes to say goodbye to each other and say hello. But thank you all for the people who aren't on the call. Whoops, that's wrong. Hold on, that's right. So for those of you who joined us, thank you for sticking with us. There have been people here the whole time. There are still people watching it, and I appreciate that. Brady, thank you for piping up. Judy, thank you for coming. I see that you had a storm and you lost your signal. I'm sorry about that. And I'm gonna see if we can't bring in. I'm gonna try and share this with the appropriate people. See if we can't get better answers too. In the meantime, thank you for this, and please, if you're doing this kind of work, think about this stuff. Ask us for help with doing assessments. I'm always happy to do assessments with people. I can't speak for the other people on here, but as always, good luck and have fun.